One of the newest members of the Tampa Bay Lightning got the first Lightning goal in the Four Nations Faceoff. We're going to talk about Jake Guentzel's play with the United States of America, a little bit more about the Four Nations as compared to the All-Star game, and then we'll take a little dip in the minor leagues on today's episode of Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Josh Sperber welcoming all of you into another episode of Locked On Lightning and thanking you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if your team is the Tampa Bay Lightning, then this is the show for you. Today's episode, we'll begin talking about the United States. Jake Guentzel getting the first goal for any Lightning player in the Four Nations face-off, with Guentzel getting an assist in the third period, the first of two Matthew Tkachuk goals in the third period. Guentzel got the secondary assist to set up the power play goal that made it 3-1. 11 seconds later, on a breakaway, Jake Guentzel scores one of his own. It was the first goal by a Lightning player this Four Nations tournament. And Guentzel also becomes the first Lightning player to be a multi-point scorer in a Four Nations game, with Braden Point and Victor Hedman each getting an assist. In Canada's opener against Sweden, Guentzel gets a goal and an assist, part of a pretty large contingent of the United States players with some multi-point games. And it was a clinic on offense in the third period for the United States of America, and a lot of it had to do with Jake Guentzel. From the beginning of the game on, Jake Guentzel was very active on the Lightning offense, routinely getting in close to the net with two shots in the first 10 minutes, including getting a takeaway to get his first shot of the game. And his second shot of the game was on a tip-in that Jussi Saros stopped. And Finland, after that, got their first goal and what ended up being their only goal of the game. It definitely wasn't Guentzel's fault that it ended up on that goal, and he certainly made up for it later in the game as well. Guentzel really did a good job of helping the United States kind of enforce their pace of play on Finland. And I think Guentzel was really a driving force in helping the United States control that game. Because especially after the way it started, this game could have gone a lot differently. 7.5 minutes. It was one of Finland's first shots of the game that Joki Harju ended up scoring. And then 3 minutes later, the Lightning put their first one in the net. They got one in the second period. And then really Guentzel's goal and assist at the beginning of the third period helped the Lightning completely break it open, because especially after that goal, those two quick goals in the first 30 seconds of the third period, it seems like that second goal just slammed the door on Finland. And that's something that Guentzel needs a lot of credit for. He played such a big role in those two goals at the beginning of the third period. And after that, you could just tell, looking at the body language of the Finland players, that they were demoralized, and they were certainly affected by the United States just starting off the third period so quickly and dominantly. 2 goals in 30 seconds does not happen very often. I mean, I can't even do that when I'm playing NHL 25 on my Xbox. It's not an easy thing to do by any right, and you can really tell that it changed the momentum of the game. The U.S. was leading until then, but it was such a close game, and it still seemed like it was anyone's game up until that third period. 2-1 going into the final frame, a slim lead, and the right team can just really jump on a 1-goal lead. And it was the United States that that ended up being that team. And again, Jake Guentzel has to be credited with a big part of that. He spent 18 and a half minutes on the ice in 22 shifts. That's third among all United States forwards in time on ice. And he was also in the top 6 in terms of shifts. So Guentzel looked like he's been a top 6. He looks like he was a top 6 forward for the United States in game number 1. And by the way that first game went, I'd be shocked if Mike Sullivan makes a ton of line adjustments before the second game. He could end up being one of the Four Nations points leaders if he keeps going like this for the Lightning. And if you're surprised by this, then you really haven't watched a lot of Lightning games this season. 54 games as a Bolt, 27 goals, 27 assists, +8 in terms of plus minus, a goal in 3 of his last 5 games heading into the Four Nations break, and 2 assists in his first ever game as a member of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Guentzel just knows how to take part in big goals, whether it's an assist or him putting in the net himself. He can really he just knows when to get those clutch goals, and really deserves a lot of credit as the Lightning catalyst, or as the U.S. catalyst for that third period run that put the game out of reach and gave the United States the first regulation win of this Four Nations tournament. And it's big because after a game each, the United States has the advantage against Canada going into the game against Canada on Saturday, which, frankly, I mean, I know I've been waiting for a lot as half Canadian, my 2 citizenships colliding. But I mean, this is a game that on Saturday, this is a game that pretty much everyone's been waiting for. I mean, these are the 2 biggest teams when it comes to international hockey in the United States and Canada, a huge rivalry. And both of them are coming off of really hard-fought wins in very different ways. I mean, the United States, really after they tied the game, after that first U.S. goal by Brady Tkachuk, the game was in the United States' control. They really dominated this contest after the game got evened up. And even when Finland scored the first goal, it didn't seem that threatening towards the United States. It still seemed like the U.S. was in control, and they just kept on pushing and pushing until something fell. And then once the shots started falling, they really did not stop. And I think Jake Guentzel deserves a lot of credit for that. He was boarded to get that second Lightning power play. Got the first shot on goal in a power play for the United States, did Guentzel. So smartly, the U.S. is using the tied leading power play goal scorer in the NHL on the power play, Braden Point being the other one at 13, with Jake Guentzel. But I truly believe that Jake Guentzel being in that game was one of the reasons the United States won. He played like a champion. I know that sounds kind of corny to say because just about every movie says it, but he really did. Guentzel played like a guy who wanted to win the tournament, and the United States looked like the best team in the tournament coming off of that game. Finland entered this tournament as the highest ranked European team in international hockey. Sweden is 6th. United States and Canada in the top 3 with Finland. And the United States were still favored coming into this game. Finland were certainly the underdogs, and the United States, by the end of it, played like that. And again, Jake Guentzel deserves a lot of credit. He was a catalyst in that third period that helped start the run and played an instrumental part in starting that run that helped the Lightning to victory against Finland. And I don't think the United States win this first game without Jake Guentzel. And if he plays like this for the rest of the tournament, the United States could take home the inaugural Four Nations Faceoff. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail about the Four Nations Faceoff, going a little bit off topic in terms of the Lightning, but we're going to talk about why I think the Four Nations format is better than the traditional All-Star format that usually comes around in this week. When the game tips off, NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's betting feature, the live betting feature specifically, because it keeps every moment of every game exciting. Whether I'm backing my Bolts for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the FanDuel app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, this is the first Four Nations Face-Off in the NHL, a new addition by the league in place of the regular All-Star game at the same time. And I already, after 2 games, am a huge fan of this Four Nations tournament. And I'm already going to say that I think it should replace the typical All-Star format, at least in hockey. Because, I mean, you look at the American sports, and with a possible exception in baseball, though I still think baseball is second in terms of this stat to the NHL. I think the NHL hockey might be the most diverse sport in America. It might be the most diverse league in the United States of America. You have so many different countries represented and just so many different people from different walks of life represented in the NHL. And I think the league did a good job of picking not just the best represented nations, but the nations where hockey means the most to the country. And it also produces 2 really solid hockey rivalries in international play. I mean, USA-Canada in hockey is personally one of my favorite rivalries in all of sports. And on Saturday, there's another big rivalry in Sweden versus Finland, which is one of the biggest in international hockey as well, right up there with US versus Canada. And I mean, I think if Russia wasn't banned from international competition, I think they would be the 4th nation that I would like to see, maybe replacing Finland, at least based on the first games. But I think that's the only change that I'd really make if I'm looking at the 4 different nations in 4 nations. I mean, Russia might be the only change that I'd make, but obviously you can't make that until next year. But without them, we've seen two really solid games with some really fast-paced hockey. I mean, you're not seeing time in the zone where everyone's just trying to dig the puck out of the wall. It's just intense, high-octane hockey, best on best, between some of the top players in the world. And that's exactly what fans want to see during All-Star break. And I think for the most part, that has been lost on not just the NHL, but all leagues over the last couple of years. I haven't really watched the only time I've watched a full All-Star game in any sport within the past 5 years was in 2022 when I was at my cousin's house in California. They're a big Steph Curry fan, so they wanted to watch the All-Star game, and that was the one where he hit like 15 three-pointers and set an NBA All-Star game record. And that was the most that I had watched an All-Star game, I think, in like 10 years. in general, the viewership of All-Star games has gone down. And I think in a lot of ways it's because there's not much to play for when it comes to an All-Star game. I think it was more to play for when they used to, I think in baseball and basketball, have the winner of the All-Star game get home court advantage in the finals. And that wasn't really a thing in the NHL during their All-Star game the last couple of years. And I think it's taken away from the play. I mean, if you look at some of the highlights from last year's All-Star game, you don't need to look for a long time to find out that not a lot of defense was being played. I mean, the first Nikita Kucherov goal, I love Kucherov. But the puck wasn't very protected. He made a steal, a takeaway on a pass, and he took like 2 strides in front of the defender, and then the whole defender gave up. And it was 1-on-1, Kucherov versus the goalie. Kuch ended up scoring. Great to see. You love it. But, it just shows the defense not really trying. And has been a recurring theme in All-Star games in the past few years. And you look at these Four Nations games, and you'd think it was Game 7 of the Stanley Cup or the gold medal game in the Olympics. The guys are really putting on for their countries and playing harder because it's for something that matters. It's for national pride that means a lot more than, some All-Star game MVP award ever could, or a win in an All-Star game that I think has been rendered meaningless by much of the sporting world. And what Four Nations does is it gives the fans an opportunity to see the top talent showcased, which in my opinion is the full point of the All-Star break. You want the best on best. That is the matchup you want during All-Star break, which is what you try to get from the fan voting and the media naming some members of the All-Star team as well. You get best on best of each conference, but players, aren't exactly repping Eastern Conference or repping Western Conference, depending on what teams they're in. They're there to represent their team, have some fun, show off for the fans a little bit. Whereas Four Nations, you're playing for something. You're playing for national pride, which, regardless of the fact that this is a new tournament, is something that players, that people are always going to take seriously. You listen to any of the NHL players talking about wearing their country's flag. I mean, Brandon Hagel was talking about, there's no greater honor, there's no greater feeling than wearing the maple leaf on his chest as a proud Canadian. Jake Guentzel has been saying what it's meant to him to be representing the United States for the first time. Victor Hedman talking about the immense honor that he has wearing the C on his chest for his home country of Sweden. And listening to the players talk about what an honor it is to be selected for Four Nations rather than how meaningful it is to be selected for an All-Star team are two very different conversations. I mean, you can really tell the genuine pride that these guys have getting selected for Four Nations. Whereas you talk about with a player making an All-Star team, it means a lot. But it's a bump in the road. It's a part of the road on the way to something bigger. Four Nations is something that these guys have been looking forward to all year. And in those first 2 games, you could really tell on the ice. These guys are playing really hard, but they're playing smart hockey. They're playing fair play, and they're not making stupid penalties. They're just playing really smart, really fast-paced, really high-energy hockey, as opposed to the 3-on-3 versus 3, half-speed, no defense kind of hockey that's been the case in All-Star games over the last couple of years. And I understand that, you don't want to play too hard on defense, mess around, get hurt, get someone else hurt. That's not what you want in these kind of games. These kind of games are about showcasing the best players in the National Hockey League, and that is great. That's exactly what you want. You want to showcase the top talent in the league without getting guys hurt, but you still want the guys to play their hardest, and that's just something that does not happen in an All-Star game. And over the first two games of Four Nations, you can already tell that guys will play extra hard for their country. So you already have one big fan of Four Nations right here, and that, for whatever that counts for, I'm just happy to see the Four Nations tournament starting off with such a success. And the Lightning have also found some success in their farm system. We'll talk about some minor league prospects to watch for the Tampa Bay Lightning in the second half of the season. So we've talked a lot about the Four Nations in this one, and we'll take a little pause from that, go into the minor league system of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Always an important part of any NHL team, and it's something that the Lightning have made considerable strides in from the beginning of the year. At the start of the season, Connor Geekie was still the big Lightning headline prospect, making waves in the Mikhail Sergachev trade and joining the Tampa Bay Lightning as their top prospect. At the beginning of the season, the Lightning at the start of the year were ranked number 29th in terms of the farm system in the entire NHL. That ranking has gone up 5 according to The Athletic, as the Lightning are now 24th. They are now the 24th ranked farm system in the NHL. Connor Geekie is now a part of that, down in the AHL for the first time today, but I don't think he can be considered a prospect anymore. So other than Connor Geekie, who are some of the Lightning prospects that we not only could see this season, but also could be making waves for the Lightning in the future? And the first guy I'm going to start with is Ryder Korzak, who was an earlier in the season trade for the Lightning, a prospect swap with the New York Rangers. Ryder Korzak came from the AHL's Hartford Wolfpack to the AHL Syracuse Crunch in a trade for another prospect in Lucas Edmonds. A forward swap. Korzak, a year younger, with some more minor league experience than Edmonds, and already it looks like he has seen some improvements since joining the Tampa Bay Lightning. In 35 games for Hartford, Korzak had 3 goals and 8 assists. He has played just 4 games with the Syracuse Crunch so far, with 2 goals and 1 assist. So Korzak already showing an increase in his scoring touch, providing for more goals in his first 4 games with the Lightning, and increasing a points per game average that was at .31 with the Hartford Wolfpack and now at .75 with the Bolts. And he is someone interesting because, I mean, you don't trade a prospect, a guy that you've drafted. You don't do a prospect swap, I feel like, that often. The most trades that I see with prospects, a big name player is involved. So if you make a prospect swap, you must have either completely given up on the one that you left out or really think that the new guy you traded for is going to be a huge improvement. And the Lightning, I mean, yeah, it's only been 4 games. But the Lightning already looked like they made out like bandits in that Lucas Edmonds trade. Edmonds had not been performing, I think, up to snuff. He was -5 with a goal and 4 assists in 26 games for the Syracuse Crunch before he left for Hartford. In the 2 games with the Wolfpack, or in the 5 games he's played with the Wolfpack, he has 2 goals. So Korzak this season with more goals in the Hartford Wolfpack than Lucas Edmonds has in total. And Edmonds, a guy who only played 6 games in the last 2 Calder Cup playoffs for the Syracuse Crunch, not a guy who was trusted in big moments. And I think it's something that the Lightning needed to do because their two best forward prospects are on their way. And that, when those, I'm talking about Ethan Gauthier and Isaac Howard. Isaac Howard has been making, I think, some more waves, definitely a more well-known and maybe popular name when it comes to Lightning prospects. But Ethan Gauthier has been just as, if not more, impressive. When you compare the two players, Isaac Howard is the leader when it comes to points per game, 1.43. But in 8 more games, Ethan Gauthier has 8 more points, 20 goals and 31 assists for Gauthier in 38 games, while Isaac Howard 22 goals and 21 assists in 30 games for Michigan State, among the NCAA leaders in goals, assists, and points. Ethan Gauthier among the leaders in the QMJHL, helping lead the Drummondville Voltigeurs to a first-place position in the QMNHL. And I think right now, as we talked about earlier this week, I think the biggest need for the Tampa Bay Lightning is forward depth. And I think, at least for the future, obviously not this season, that is where I think the biggest source of forward depth lies, with Gauthier and Howard. They're listed as Gauthier on the right wing, Howard on the left wing. Isaac Howard's a guy who could be in the NHL as soon as next year. He is leading a strong Michigan State team and has been showered with praise by the Tampa Bay Lightning staff as he is gearing up for potentially his first NHL season next year. But those are the two guys where I think the future of the Tampa Bay Lightning offense lies, in Gauthier and Isaac Howard. Gauthier is both of them are just about 20 years old. Gauthier can't even drink yet. And Isaac Howard, I think, is just 21. But two really young players who absolutely dominating in two leagues where you can get a really good idea for young talent. The Lightning also have a really solid defender in the QMJHL, and Jan Golicic, 3 goals, 24 assists in 44 games. In terms of youth, he might be the Lightning's best defensive prospect, but I'm still pretty high on Derek Pulio, who is 5th among all Lightning prospects in terms of scoring in the AHL. Pulio, though, in his early 30s with some NHL experience underneath his belt. And he's, I think, the main guy I think the Lightning should go to if they're looking for some defensive depth at the trade deadline. Now, I think that if you look at this prospect list, Gauthier and Howard are probably the two guys I would say should be off limits. Maybe put Gage Gonzalez on that list as well, since he has made some good strides since his sent down to the AHL. He's been playing really well in the AHL this season, and especially in his second stint with the Lightning, has shown that he can really be an asset to the Tampa Bay's bottom 6 forwards and maybe climb up through those rankings over the course of his young career. But Gonzalez is looking like a nice prospect. Dylan Duke made a nice first appearance for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's someone who could be back later this year. 22 points with 13 goals and 9 assists in 37 games for Syracuse, and he got his first NHL goal in his first NHL game on the road for the Tampa Bay Lightning as well. So when it comes to this year, I don't think we'll see Gauthier or Howard in a Lightning jersey. Dylan Duke is someone I think could come back. Jaden DeRoe is someone I think the Lightning could call up later in the season. He has bounced between Orlando and Syracuse. Jesse Elonen, I think, is always an option. He's one of the most highly regarded and considered most NHL-ready prospects in the Tampa Bay Lightning system. 22 points in 45 games for Syracuse this year. He's certainly a player that I think could and maybe should see ice time for the Tampa Bay Lightning. But I think it's a good sign that their farm system is improving when it comes to talent. And there's certainly some players I think that can make a big impact over the next couple of seasons. I think right now, Dylan Duke, Gage Gonzalez are the guys on offense that can look to make an impact in the NHL over the rest of the course of this season. And down the road, Ethan Gautier and Isaac Howard are two players that I think could turn into some big-time franchise players for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And we'll keep an eye on them as they continue to rise through the system. And we are going to take a pause for the weekend. We'll have some more Four Nations to recap for you when we return on Monday. But until then, I'm Josh Sperber, thanking all of you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen today and every day. For your second listen, make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steele and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, please give us a like, a follow, a subscribe. We really appreciate your guys' support. And thank you for listening to the show. So please follow and subscribe. And join us on Monday when we return to talk more Four Nations and a whole lot more when it comes to Lightning hockey. Until then, thank you all for tuning in and enjoy your weekend.